The All Blacks may have walked away from Cape Town with a 38-21 victory over the Stormers, but the final score does not tell the full story. In fact, if you only looked at the scoreboard, you might think New Zealand had produced a convincing opening performance on their rugby's greatest rivalry tour. But look a little deeper, and a very different picture begins to emerge. Because for long periods, the All Blacks looked vulnerable. And with the Springboks waiting on the other side of this tour, that has created some serious questions for Dave Rennie and his players. This was supposed to be an opportunity for New Zealand to make an immediate statement. They were the favourites. They had the international experience. They had the confidence of a strong run of results behind them. And they had every reason to believe they could control the contest from the opening whistle. But the Stormers had other ideas. The home side refused to simply play the role of underdogs. Instead, they attacked the All Blacks physically, challenged them at the scrum, competed aggressively at the breakdown and forced New Zealand into uncomfortable situations. For much of the first half, the Stormers looked completely capable of staying in the contest. When the teams went into the break, New Zealand were only 14-7 ahead. That was not the kind of halftime score many people expected. The All Blacks were in front, but they were certainly not in control. And that is where the concerns began. The biggest problem was not simply that New Zealand made mistakes. Mistakes happen in rugby. The bigger concern was the number of different areas in which those mistakes appeared. The scrum came under pressure. The All Blacks struggled at times to deal with the high ball. They gave away unnecessary penalties. Their defense was tested, and they found themselves having to deal with the Stormers' driving maul. Then came the disciplinary problems. The All Blacks were shown 3 yellow cards. That statistic alone should make Dave Rennie uncomfortable. Against the Stormers, New Zealand managed to survive those periods with fewer players on the field. Against the Springboks, surviving could be a completely different challenge. Because South Africa do not need many opportunities. Give the Springboks territory, and they can build pressure. Give them penalties, and they can turn those penalties into points. Give them a dominant scrum, and they can repeatedly attack the same weakness. Give them a yellow card, and suddenly the All Blacks could be forced into a long defensive period against one of the most physically powerful teams in world rugby. That is exactly the situation New Zealand must avoid. And this is why the reaction from New Zealand media has been so critical. The message is not necessarily that the All Blacks are a bad team. Far from it. The concern is that this version of the All Blacks cannot afford to make the same mistakes against the Springboks. The Stormers exposed weaknesses. South Africa will try to exploit them. That is the difference. But there was also a very important positive for New Zealand. They showed character. Even when things were not going according to plan, the All Blacks did not panic. They kept fighting. They kept carrying. They kept searching for opportunities. And eventually, when the Stormers began to tire, New Zealand found another gear. The All Blacks suddenly became more direct. Their attacking accuracy improved. Their ball carrying became more effective. And then the scoreboard started moving very quickly. New Zealand scored 4 late tries and turned what had been a tense contest into a 38-21 victory. That late surge should not be ignored. It demonstrated that the All Blacks have serious attacking weapons. It also showed the fitness and depth within the squad. When the Stormers started running out of energy, New Zealand were able to keep pushing. That is a positive sign for Dave Rennie. But there is still an important question. Did the All Blacks finally take control because they raised their level? Or did the Stormers simply run out of energy? The answer could be a combination of both. New Zealand deserve credit for finishing strongly. You do not score 4 late tries simply by accident. The players still had to execute. They had to find space. They had to carry strongly. They had to make the right decisions. And they had to finish their chances. But the fact remains that the Stormers were still level at 14-14 deep into the second half. That means New Zealand were not cruising. They were fighting for control. And perhaps that is the most important lesson from this match. Winning while playing below your best is not always a bad thing. In international rugby, teams sometimes have to win ugly. They have to survive difficult moments. They have to adapt. They have to find another way. And the All Blacks did exactly that. But against the Springboks, survival alone will not be enough. New Zealand will need much greater control. They will need to be disciplined. They will need to be accurate. They will need to dominate their set piece. And most importantly, they will need to keep 15 players on the field. 3 yellow cards against the Stormers cannot simply be dismissed. It is a warning. And it is a warning that Dave Rennie and his coaching staff will have to take seriously. South Africa will test New Zealand's discipline. They will test the breakdown. They will test the scrum. They will test the defense. And they will constantly challenge the All Blacks to remain calm when the pressure becomes intense. That is where experienced players such as Beauden Barrett become important. Barrett does not need to produce something spectacular every minute of a match. What New Zealand will need from him is control. They will need smart decisions. They will need accurate kicking. They will need composure when the opposition is building pressure. And they will need leadership when the match becomes chaotic. Against the Springboks, small decisions can become huge moments. A clever kick can change territory. A good attacking decision can create a try. A poor pass can give South Africa possession. A needless penalty can put the All Blacks under pressure. Everything matters. That is why this tour is such a huge test for Dave Rennie. He has inherited a team with enormous talent. But talent alone will not be enough in South Africa. The All Blacks need consistency. They need to perform the basics under pressure. They need to make the right decisions when they are tired. And they need to maintain discipline for the entire 80 minutes. The Stormers have already shown New Zealand exactly where they can be attacked. The scrum is one area. The aerial contest is another. The driving maul is another. And discipline is perhaps the biggest concern of all. Because the Springboks will be watching. Every mistake made in Cape Town can be studied. Every penalty can be analyzed. Every weakness at the scrum can be targeted. Every problem under the high ball can become part of South Africa's game plan. That is simply how elite international rugby works. The best teams do not just watch their opponents. They study them. They identify weaknesses. And once they find a weakness, they keep attacking it until the opposition proves it can stop them. That is why the All Blacks' next match against the Sharks becomes extremely important. This is not simply another game on the schedule. It is another examination. Another opportunity for New Zealand to prove that they have learned from Cape Town. The All Blacks need to look cleaner. They need to be more accurate. They need to reduce the number of penalties. They need to improve their set piece. And they need to show that the Stormers' performance was a warning rather than a preview of what is coming. There is still plenty of reason for optimism. The All Blacks have talented players. They have experienced leaders. They have dangerous attacking options. And under Dave Rennie, there is clearly an attempt to build a team capable of playing with greater freedom, speed and aggression. That attacking potential was visible during the Stormers match. When New Zealand finally found their rhythm, the Stormers struggled to contain them. That is the exciting part of this All Blacks team. They can hurt opponents. They can score quickly. And they can turn a close match into a comfortable victory in a very short period. But the challenge is making that level of performance last longer. Against the Stormers, New Zealand needed a late surge. Against South Africa, they may not get the opportunity. The Springboks could already be ahead by the time the All Blacks find their rhythm. They could already have established territorial control. They could already have forced New Zealand into repeated defensive sets. And they could already have taken advantage of disciplinary mistakes. That is why New Zealand need to start faster and stay composed for longer. They cannot simply wait for the opposition to tire. They have to create the pressure themselves. That means winning the gain line. It means winning the breakdown. It means protecting their ball. It means kicking intelligently. And it means making sure their forwards provide the platform their backs need. Because while players such as Beauden Barrett and the wider All Blacks backline may receive the headlines, the forwards could ultimately decide how competitive New Zealand are against South Africa. If the scrum is stable, the backs get better attacking opportunities. If the maul defense is strong, the opposition loses one of its major weapons. If the breakdown is controlled, New Zealand can dictate the speed of the game. And if the forwards carry effectively, the entire attacking structure becomes more dangerous. That is why the next few matches will be so important. They will give Dave Rennie information. He will be able to see which combinations work. He will be able to identify which players respond best to pressure. He will be able to see where the team needs more experience. And he will have the chance to make adjustments before the Springboks tests. That is one of the advantages of playing these tour matches. The All Blacks are being tested before the biggest challenge arrives. They can make mistakes now, they can fix them now. They can experiment now. But once the Springboks series begins, there will be far less room for error. South Africa will not care about the All Blacks' previous victories. They will not care about the final score against the Stormers. They will not care about New Zealand's attacking reputation. They will simply test them. Physically, tactically, mentally, and for 80 minutes. That is why this 38-21 victory has to be viewed in two different ways. On one hand, it was an important win. The All Blacks travelled to Cape Town and got the result. They showed resilience. They showed fitness. They showed attacking quality. And they finished the match strongly. Those are genuine positives. But on the other hand, it was also a warning. The All Blacks cannot afford to repeat the same mistakes against South Africa. Because if they do, the scoreboard could tell a very different story. The biggest mistake would be to look at the final margin and assume everything is fine. It is not. But the opposite mistake would be to look at the criticism and assume the All Blacks are incapable of challenging the Springboks. That is not true either. The reality is somewhere in between. New Zealand have enough talent to compete. They have enough experience to challenge South Africa. And they have enough attacking quality to cause serious problems. But they must become more accurate. They must become more disciplined. And they must become much more comfortable with the physical pressure that comes with playing in South Africa. The Stormers have already provided the warning. Now the All Blacks have to respond. Fix the scrum, improve the aerial contest. Defend the maul. Reduce the penalties. Stay calm. Keep 15 players on the field. And then give their attacking players the platform to do what they do best. If they can make those improvements, this All Blacks team could become a serious problem for the Springboks. But if the same weaknesses continue, South Africa will almost certainly target them. That is why the next match matters. That is why the Stormers' result matters. And that is why the criticism matters. The All Blacks have been given a reality check before the biggest games of the tour. Now they have a choice. They can ignore the warning, or they can use it. And if Dave Rennie gets the response he wants from his players, this difficult opening match could eventually prove extremely valuable. Because sometimes the most useful victories are the ones that expose your weaknesses. The All Blacks won. But they also learned. They learned that South African teams will not allow them to play comfortably. They learned that discipline has to improve. They learned that their scrum has to become more reliable. They learned that the aerial contest cannot be treated casually. And they learned that even when they are favourites, they still have to fight for every metre. The Springboks will be watching, and the real examination is still to come. So the question is no longer whether the All Blacks can beat the Stormers. They already have. The question is whether they can take what they learned in Cape Town and use it against South Africa. Because against the Springboks, being vaguely competitive will not be enough. New Zealand will need to be ready from the first minute. They will need physicality. They will need precision. They will need discipline. They will need composure. And they will need 15 players on the field. The 38-21 victory has given the All Blacks confidence. But the performance has also given them a warning. Now